Today on the mini workbench, we're making picture frames. Warm welcome back to the Proto 49 workshop and the mini workbench. Now, my beautiful and talented wife has produced these lovely little paintings of dogs, and I love their character. Great colours, love this background colour, awesome. Nevertheless, one thing missing is a frame. Now, I've made frames like this before for similar paintings that she's done before, and I'm going to reproduce the same sort of frame. Now, the problem with these canvases is twofold. One is they're not perfectly square, I don't believe, when they manufacture them. But the second real issue is where the folds come over for the canvas itself, where they've stretched the canvas on. They can get quite fat and lumpy, which means that sometimes the dimensions in one direction are quite different to the other. Now, this frame here just fits on this one. The internal dimensions of this one are around, what's that, 152 and a half, 153 excuse me, 153 and a half. So it's not perfectly square and it's a bit out of shape, but it doesn't fit on that one very well, and I don't want to force it. Well, what I'm going to do is make some new ones that fit over a bit loosely, so that they can actually basically be a standard size that I can fit onto any sized or any brand of this size, nominal size canvas. So that's the plan, and we'll reproduce this. Now, these mitres here I cut with a table saw on a sled that I made for the purpose, but it needs a tweak, so let's have a look at that sled now. Alright, well, here's our sled here. It's a little bit dusty. I painted this because I got crazy with painting it. This is basically made from MDF. I think it looks like about 8mm MDF. And there's a couple of pieces here. And these were offcuts, and I can't remember why I made that narrow. Just can't remember. I think I was actually trying to make the whole thing fairly compact, but realised I needed the width here. This is just floorboard offcuts. There's some framing pine here. This is where the blade retracts to when you slide it. The blade sits inside here, and you slide it forward. It makes the cut, and the blade retains in there. So that's the sort of safety aspect to it. It's got a stopper on the end to stop me pushing it through too far. It catches on that. It's also got a little hook here that hooks onto the end of the far end of the table saw, so when I've got it in the retracted position, it doesn't tip up on me. So this is our tool. Now, there is a problem with it. I have noticed, and it's probably easiest to show with this guy, that we are a little bit out of square, and I'm not sure whether you can see that, but I can feel the edge there. Well, that needs to be further across. So let's get that flush. And there's about a 2mm or 1.5mm gap there. 1.5 maybe. So I've done some testing out with our trusty electronic square. This one's an eye gauging brand. I really quite like this. We'll turn that on and we'll zero it. It's just a matter of putting on a flat surface and hitting the 0 button. So that's now zeroed. This should be 135 degrees between here and here. Now, because of the length of this, I can't get this in, so I've scored a line here parallel to the cut line that the blade made. So if we bring this out to 135 degrees, what we find, well, there's 135, good, nice. What we find is we're very close to that score line. It's not quite perfect. I think it's 135 and a half maybe. 135.1, it's pretty close, so maybe not anything like a half. But the problem is over on this other side, where it's quite a ways out. You can actually see that there. So again, I've put some score marks here, and I can run that parallel with the score marks and find that there's that gap in there. Now, can you see that with this light? You can only just see that gap in there. So what I have done here is I've popped some, I think it was 6 layers, maybe it's 8 layers of masking tape on here, just to hold this out, because the parts we're using, this is the stock that I've created, and these parts essentially, let's pull it out here, I've done some marking out. These parts, that one will essentially sit in there, and you can see that gap opened up there nicely. When I put those together like that, of course they'll be cut, that one and that one, and then they'll eventually come together at a point. But if I just pop those together like that, and then get this little guy out and spin it around, actually we should go that way because it's, let's see how accurate we end up getting. Well, look at that, 90 degrees. So that's exactly what I want to achieve. So I know that this is 135 to here, and then I've popped that out a little bit to make 90 between those two, which actually means I've got quite an accurate tool now. So I'm very happy with that, just a couple of layers of masking tape. I've had a look at this, and I may, in future, if I need to, you know, cut that off with the little multi-tool, cut in under there and relocate it, bringing it out that distance. The other option is just to persist with masking tape, or even a layer of edge banding would actually, you know, iron it on there, and maybe that would give me the answer. But it is what it is. So basically now off to the table saw to cut these. Now I've got to cut, what I basically do is I've lined these up, I've just marked these for the cut that I need to make. I've done that with the grain continuous through there, so that when we join them together the grain will be nice and continuous. And then after that we then need to focus on the other end. Now interestingly, these aren't going to mate with each other, these two. They actually align with these other ends to make up if I extended that out to make up a square. So I've got all these marked correctly to match. So I need to make those cuts first, and then I'll set a depth stop, and then we'll make the second set of cuts for the other ends when we swap these around. So that's the plan. Now I'm just laying out these parts for cutting, and there's a particular order that we need to deal with these. I'm trying to keep the grain consistent. You see there the grain is not consistent, so we need to find the edges where the grain is consistent. Now they're both rears, and I think actually it was that piece came off there. Let's have a look. No, it would be C then D, so I numbered these from this end, 3C, 3D, so those two would be continuous. So we want, this way up, we want those inside surfaces to be cut, and we'll just put a mark there as number 1. Similar here, so that's B and that's A joined onto B that way, parallel grain, roll that in and find the bottom edge that we're marking. That's the bottom edge. And which end was I doing? That end. And here's another cut here, pair of cuts here. We'll call that number 2. Now interestingly, what we have to do here is work out the same for these ends, but basically, if I remember rightly, those two go together. Let's just check the grain orientation. No, they don't look like that. Oh, they're never going to match because they're not continuous. That's right. Actually, what I'll do is I'll just remind myself by looking at what I did with these other ones. So here's the set for, there's 1 and 2. 3s are the outsides and 4s are the insides. So 3s are the outsides, makes it nice and easy. 3s are the outsides, make that 3, and 4s are the insides. Now 3s on the outside, 4s are the insides, and that's for 1, 2, 3, 4. Now that's going to be off cut, so I'll need to renumber once I make the actual cuts. 4, 4, 4, 4, 3, 3, 3. Wonderful. Let's do the same thing for the last set, see if we can get it right the last time. For A and for B, grain looks continuous there. Roll it that way. The outsides are going to be continuous because that point and that point touch. That's number 1. Okay. C and D, continuous grain, roll that inside. That's number 2. Outsides were the 3s. 1, 2, 3. And the insides were the 4s. 1, 2, 3, 4. One, 2, 4, 4, 4, 4, 3, 3. So whatever's going to happen in the cutting, they're all going to be the same. Let's take them out to the table saw. Well, this is the setup for cutting these out. You can see how the blade is hidden in here and makes the cut as you slide. And I'm set up now actually to do the first set of our stock. So the setup I'm using is actually my EzyCut table saw. This is a 10-inch table saw made in the 50s, maybe 60s, depending on which model you get. And it's just a simple little thing. There's actually a joint there that I haven't restored, but I bought this a little while ago and have restored it to this condition. It was in terrible condition when I first got it. One of the things I have done is make this new fence for it with a Bessemer style, small version of a Bessemer style fence guide and track. And it works really well. It's the one limitation of it is it doesn't have a tilting blade, but it's a great little device for a small space. Okay, now these first ends are cut. Now doing the other ends, we need an internal dimension here of 154mm. So I've marked that there. And I need to creep up on that, and once I do, I'm actually going to go and test it on one of the frames. I know it's too large, slightly loose fit on the actual pictures, but let's get that set up. I do have to put stop blocks here once we get the dimension right. Okay, just back at the mini workbench, just sorting out whether or not this will fit. Now this is that dimension of 154 that I mentioned, and that will be a loose fit around each of these dimensions, taking into account some of this fold which will press in a little bit as you fit it carefully. So 154 is looking really good as the right dimension for a nice fit, not too tight, around these items, these frames. Alright, this by the way is little blocks I've been making up to actually act as our clamps. So I don't have another piece there, do I? But if I had another piece in here, these will go around, and then I'll use a ratchet strap style clamp or a not ratchet, one of these type clamps to pull it tight. The only difficulty here is there's no give for tightness, so I might have to create a little loop of shock cord just to pull it together, but we'll get to that. We'll cross that bridge when we get to it. Okay, back out at table saw world. I've just set up these stop blocks on the end. A few birds in the area. I've set up these stop blocks on the end using the touch on the saw blade itself, so light touch on the saw blade, and then tapping these up to fit there, so that we'll have a consistent length as we cut. Now I'm going to try one and see what happens next. One thing I was indicating there, I don't really like that possibility, so I might put a stop block there to prevent the hand slipping over. Right, we're back inside at the mini workbench. You can see I've just put an extension on the mini workbench, just a piece of MDF that's actually painted. Not sure what that's from, but it's useful. Just occasionally the mini workbench is not quite big enough, just occasionally. Right, these are the rough cut components laid out the same way that we actually marked them. So we've got the A's, the B's, the C's and the D's. I've got a 154 here just to remind me, because I have made mistakes previously and used up a lot of timber. Now these are the rough cuts off the saw. The blade probably needs replacing, but the front edge here and the top edge here are the ones that are most important, because they'll be the edges that will be seen. This I've always kept this outside faces with the numbering. This is set D, that's number 1, set D number 2, actually that's now an inside, that's interesting. That's an outside and that's an inside. But we did do that to keep the grain continuous. Did we actually achieve it? Actually, that's an interesting question. It looks like we didn't on this one. Oh yeah, we did. Yes, that is, or is it? Is that continuous grain? No, it's not. Interesting. This one might have had an odd layout. Never mind. Won't be the worst thing in the world because they're pretty consistent looking pieces of timber. Alright, next thing to do is clean this up, and I'll do a rough clean up here, and then these are just going to be glued together. I've had success with just gluing them with standard wood glue, but once we clean them up we'll get a nice version of this layout. Those splinters are in the way, but this is essentially our clamping technique. That's when we get those cleaned up, they'll line up nicely like that inside these clamps. So 1, 2, C goes to C, D to D, and B to B. Now these are an experiment. They're based on standard band clamps. Looked up on YouTube a few people that have made them, and this just looks like the simplest way to do it for now. I've got some cork that I'm going to put on the inside of these, just some 1mm thick sticky back cork, just to give it a surface that I would prefer rather than wood to wood. So I'll do that, and then we'll start to mock this up clean this set up and see how we go with an initial glue up. Right, back at the mini workbench. This is the cork that I'm using just to face. It's a millimetre thick, it says. It's got a sticky adhesive backing. Won't peel that off. Yeah, it's really good. Came in a big roll, very cheap. It's only $12 for a big roll, so that was great. So what I've basically done is I've faced each of these with a piece. Then I'm just coming along with sandpaper here and just removing the excess, the overlap. This one's actually a large excess. All the others I actually trimmed a little bit tighter, but just make that round that corner. Similar to this one. This one's again a big one. I'll put the scissors away, but just a matter of sanding off the excess cork, going around the corner. And we've got ourselves a nice set of cork faced clamping cauls, corner clamping cauls for the purpose of making these frames. So I'll just finish these up. I'm very happy with that effect. That will be a very useful item. We'll vacuum that up later. Alright, so there's our clamping cauls. Here's our components. Okay, A goes to A, D goes to D, C goes to C, and B goes to B. Now what I actually will do, this is the bottom face, so I'll clamp that with down on the table just in case there's any overflow. So those go there and those go there. These are rough sanded on these. These are just the raw edges, and that's going to look nice. That's actually the front edge there. So let's see what's happening here. Is there something fouling that? No, that's fine. Alright. The basic idea here is just to glue these together and then put a strap around them with this clamping caul. So I've done these before by just gluing them, so I'll just grab the glue. It's a standard yellow wood glue that I'm using. Actually, it's not a yellow glue, it's a white glue. It's a PVC. So I'll just put a bit on here. Now I actually don't use too much. I use enough to cover the whole surface, and I make sure the whole surface is covered. But I don't want to flood it. I only need to cover the one surface. I think this tube's a little bit blocked, but enough's coming out. That's actually probably a better amount than the previous one. Some of the excess on that one. Now this one. I went that way, and the last one goes on there. Okay, we'll wipe the fingers. It'd be better if this was a melamine surface, but it's actually very close to melamine. It's paint. These will need to line up carefully. That one doesn't look perfect, and neither does that one. So my cutting technique, I might have got these ones out of order in terms of my cutting, but pretty close. And when we clamp this together, let's see if we experiment with the clamp. A couple of different ways I could clamp this, but this is our experiment. Ooh, it's not going to make it, that one. Alright, well, good thing is we've got two of those. So I'll just run them end to end. about midway. Make sure they're not twisted. It's not twisted. These are brand new, I just bought them today. It's handy to have lots of these. Alright, so this is the theory. So I'll run this one tight, and then we'll settle the it's not as easy as I thought, but yeah, essentially not having much not having a give, a rubber component to this. I'll just run it up halfway up the edge as well. We just want it in the middle. So this is actually putting reasonable pressure on, so I'm quite happy so far. But basically what I need to do, and this will work out actually with just one clamp, but next time I try this, what I will do is I will use one of these clamps, and I will I'll create a section of rubber that will help us to position it. I'll just try and tighten that again. No, have to hold it. Check for square. This is my most below the surface. This is a starret. It'll fit in. Yes. It's a bit out of square. Let's see if the other side's a bit out of square. That's actually pretty much perfectly square. So off that panel, that just needs to go out a little. Oh, it feels square down there. Oh no, oh yeah, it's just a little bit out of square at the top here. That must mean that one of my cuts is not completely square. But for all intents and purposes, that's looking like a pretty close fit for the time being. So very happy with that for the time being. What we'll do is run a little glue line. Actually, I can probably see in here. Yeah, no, that's okay. I'll run a little glue line in each of the corners, just to get some glue down into them. They just looked a little bit dry. Alright, well, there's the top edge. Sorry, the back edge, because that's the one we marked all the way around, and the front edge. I think the joins actually look closer on this top edge. Right, that's a start. We're on the way. This is a loose test fit. Let's just see whether that guy drops in. Look at that. Absolutely perfect. Can't go wrong with that. Better take that out so we don't glue it on. Alright, very happy so far. Well, I'll assemble the others and then we'll tidy them up and show you them all mounted with the canvases in the frames. But that's essentially our approach to making these frames. A couple of improvements and maybe they'll be a bit more efficient next time. But thanks for watching. and I might finish up and show you a few shots of the finished item once I've done them all.